What is up with these protests? I know a lot of people are asking that question. It is mayhem out there. We've got people peacefully protesting, sitting, kneeling, holding up their signs, marching in the streets peacefully. But also we've got people who are protesting not so peacefully. We're seeing looting, smashing of windows, graffiti, theft and burglary and assaults. We're seeing the police. They are in riot gear. They're firing rubber bullets at people. They are firing tear gas at people. It's really scary what is going on out there right now. I don't think we've seen anything like this. Now, there have been protests and riots in the past in pockets of the country that have been worse than this. Of course, the LA riots in the 90s after Rodney King. There have been riots in Detroit and in Chicago, all of which were worse individually. But I don't think we've ever seen anything like this where all across the country we're seeing cop cars being lit on fire, buildings being looted, graffiti everywhere, and cops and National Guard firing, non-lethal weapons at people, but nonetheless very painful. I don't think we've seen anything like this where it's happened in multiple cities all across the country. So a big question people are wanting to know is what is really going on out there? Obviously, the spark that really sort of lit the fuse, I think, was obviously George Floyd's murder. We see a man who it was all caught on tape and it was all very obvious. And he was gasping for air saying, "I can't breathe." And this man was murdered after using a counterfeit $20 bill in a grocery store. He was arrested and he was murdered for a counterfeit 20 at a grocery store. And I think his death, obviously, this has been a point of contention going on for years now in this country with Black Lives Matter movement, really showcasing that, cops are killing people, they're using violence, and they're getting away with it. There just seems to be this code amongst cops that they don't get arrested, they don't get charged, they don't go to jail. And a lot of it has been because they don't want to ruin the morale with cops. They don't want to make them afraid to do their jobs. They're also afraid of putting cops in jail because they know that that's in many cases could be a death sentence. That's basically doom for them, or they have to be in solitary isolation, which is a form of torture. So a lot of them have been extremely hesitant to charge cops for the crimes that they commit. And obviously, the public sentiment is fed up. We want to see cops held accountable. We are fed up with the authoritarian state that we are living in. But I do believe that there's another layer going on with these protests, and it is the overall feeling of oppression that people are feeling in this country, no matter the color of their skin. But this pandemic has really shone a light on a sore spot in our nation and in our economic system of unregulated, free-for-all capitalism. And that has been that the rich are getting richer and the middle class is dwindling down to hardly anything, and the poor are getting poorer. And this has put a strain on people to the point where when the pandemic hit and suddenly people were forced out of their jobs and yet they're still forced to pay their bills. You've got people here in Los Angeles where your average one-bedroom apartment is, $3,400 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. People are now finding themselves in $10,000 of debt with no hope of ever paying that back. No real way to pay that back. Their wages are not going up. In fact, their wages are cut or they've lost their jobs. And so, this sentiment is going on all around the country where people are feeling desperate, hopeless, strapped. And really, George Floyd's death is really a physical manifestation of how people are feeling. They're feeling like a boot is on their neck and they cannot breathe, and they're trying to use a counterfeit 20 at a grocery store to get the things that they want or need. And that is the sentiment that many people, they saw that symbolism of that death and said, I relate to this. I feel this, and I'm angry, and I want to go out there and I want to express that anger in some way. So we're really seeing two protests going on. but really one protest when you think about it. It's a protest against this authoritarian police state that we live in, where the government or the powers that be, the police, can order you around. They can force you into basically imprisonment in some way, whether it be actual prisons or home imprisonment. They can take your livelihood away from you or your life away from you, and there are no consequences. And so I think what we're seeing right now is this just overall unleashing of this feeling that has been building up, not just during this pandemic, but building up prior to this point. Obviously, the hyper police state that the Black Lives Matter movement has been showcasing and highlighting, this the police culture, police unions that protect these cops, and just the overall hyper military, hyper authoritarian culture that our country has embraced and really was founded on and continued to embrace and continues to embrace. The Black Lives Matter movement definitely was shining a light on that when it came to police culture. And then in addition to that, we see the pandemic shine that light on that culture in other ways, how just the rich can get richer, the government can force you into your home, take your job away, and then say, you don't have any money to pay your bills? Well, that's your problem. You should have had some savings, even though many people are living paycheck to paycheck because the cost of living has drastically increased. There was once a time where you could buy a brand new car with a minimum wage job. There was once a time where you could buy a home and have a stay-at-home spouse and 3 kids, and one job, one blue-collar job, could actually afford all of that. Those times are long gone. The American dream is dead, and it's been dead. I understand this. It's been dead for the African-American community. It never rose for them, quite frankly, right? It never really was a true reality for them. And for much of the middle class, of those who had the privilege of having that American dream in previous generations, our generations are seeing that that's not possible now. So we're seeing this huge level of angst and anger and just pushback of the establishment, pushback of authoritarianism, pushback of the hyper-police militarized state. That is happening right now amongst all groups of people. So, I'm seeing a lot of footage of these looters and people committing a lot of crime and vandalism and whatnot. And there's peaceful protesters who then point at them and say, don't do that. This is about George Floyd. This is about his death. This is about Black Lives Matter. And I really think there's 2 different types of protests going on here. So unfortunately, for the Black Lives Matter movement, because the other aspect of this protest is not being highlighted, which it should be, because we're not discussing the fact that people are also protesting economic despair, because that's not being highlighted, then the Black Lives Matter movement is just being blamed for everything. And in reality, if we just say, look, people are pissed off. This protest is a convergence of people feeling anger against the hyper-authoritarian, unequal state of things in this nation. And we can kind of point that out, then I think there would be more understanding and more coming together and people saying, look, you and I might be marching for different reasons, but we're still ultimately marching for the same reason. We're still ultimately protesting the same thing. And it's that we are fed up with the powers that be. But of course, we're not hearing about any of that. No one in leadership is talking about the fact that perhaps maybe the pandemic and forcing millions upon millions upon millions of Americans out of their jobs and forcing them into debt and forcing them to stand in lines at food banks and worry about their future and not be able to pay their mortgage and worry that they're going to be losing their homes. I mean, I'm hearing people around me in my own neighborhood arguing with each other, families being torn apart because they're worried they're going to lose their homes. And so we don't see any of the leaders talking about that. No, instead they're saying, okay, George Floyd's death, we're going to try to do something about that. I don't know what are they planning on doing about that? They've got the guy in jail who killed him, which was not fast enough. That the cop obviously should have been arrested right away. Obviously, the other cops need to be as well arrested and charged. So clearly there's things that need to happen when it comes to George Floyd's death. But there's also another protest going on, and I just can't stress that enough. That is why we're seeing the looting. That is why we're seeing the graffiti. That is why we're seeing the violence. People are absolutely feeling like, a boot is against their neck. All of America is feeling this way, and we need to recognize that. So I see that there's a lot of people missing the point. I hear people in the media all day today saying, peaceful is okay, but these riots and lootings are misusing George Floyd's death, and they're just missing the point. There's another point that is just really being missed, and it's this opportunity that Trump had to get it and to resonate a message to the people. And instead, he's really botched this. And I really think come November, I'm at the point, I don't think he's going to win. I actually think Biden surprisingly will win the election. I think it's just because there's so much anger towards Trump. And I think there's going to be apathy on the Republican side that he's just not going to get the votes. I think people will vote against him out of anger. So I'm saying that now. I don't think he's going to win in November. And I think he made it worse for himself these last couple of days, the way he's handled these protests. The better way, rather than saying we're going to return to law and order and we're going to militarize even more and we're going to go after you even more and heavier and harder and we're going to get the law enforcement involved and really go after you people. What did he say? Once the looting starts, the shooting starts. Missed the point. Totally missed the point. People are fed up with the authoritarian, hyper-militarized state that this country is in. And instead, he could have said George Floyd's death which he did. He said this was terrible, shouldn't have happened. It's a murder. We need to go after these people. Okay. But then in the same breath, he says, but we're sending the military out to get all of you who are protesting this. Totally missing the point that the people are also protesting this hyper-authoritarian state that we're in. People are protesting the infringement on their freedoms, their liberty, their livelihood, their lives. That is what all of this is about. It is many groups of people coming from many sides of the aisle coming together protesting. And if you think it's just one side, which is where he's missed the mark, he's saying, oh, it's Antifa, right? He's blaming this on Antifa, like as if there's that many people in Antifa. Give me a break. I know one person in my life that's in Antifa. I don't know anybody else who's in it. So he blames this all on Antifa, like that's that many people, and says, now we're going to come after you and we're going to get you. Missing the point. That instead a better message would be to say, where he could have said is, look, clearly people are upset about being locked in their homes, their jobs being ripped away, the economic distress, the government giving them $1,200 and then saying, sorry, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. Ooh, if your business goes under, that's just too bad. You must have had a crappy business, even though we forced you to close your doors, even though we forced you out of a job. Gee, why don't you have enough money to pay your rent? What's wrong with you? Should have said, look, people are fed up. And clearly, they're sick of the police state that we're living in, the hyper-authoritarian police state that we're living in. And that could have been and would have been a message that actually resonated with the people. Instead, I'm seeing a lot of hypocrisy. I'm seeing hypocrisy all around on this. For one, you've got mostly on the left during the pandemic, it was the governors, the more democratic governors and mayors who were shutting things down, forcing people inside, going overboard with the pandemic, taking freedoms away from people, saying to them, you have to stay in, you shutting things down. Whereas it was the Republican governors who were like, you know what, we like our freedoms, we like our liberties. And so, we'll let you have the choice whether or not you're going to go out or not. It's up to you. And so it's interesting to me that so many on the right were criticizing those on the left, saying, wow, you people are authoritarian, hyper militant. Look at you fascists. You guys are shutting down your public, telling them to go home. You guys are being hyper authoritarian. And then here we are now when there's protests, all of a sudden those same Republicans on the right are saying, ooh, get the military out there, shut those people down, get them. Put them in jail. Put all of them in jail. Get the military out there. Guns in their faces. Shoot them if they're looting. Do all of that. That's a hypocrite for you. That's a hypocrite. Are you for freedom? Are you for liberty? Are you for allowing people their constitutional rights? obviously, looting and violence and all of that is against the law, understandably. And I can understand people saying, we definitely don't want that. But to say, why don't you go harder on these people? And now we've got curfews on us. I'm not allowed to go outside right now. And it's the hypocrisy of that. And then on the same, you flip the coin and you go to the left, and the hypocrisy that we're seeing from the left. You got all these same people who said, stay inside, shelter in place, you're going to get the virus. How dare you threaten my life by going outside and being selfish? And, how dare you do all of that? Those are the very same people who are outside right now protesting. So all of a sudden, everybody's showing their hypocrisy. And at the same time, nobody's getting it. I feel like everybody's missing the point and everybody's showing themselves to be a hypocrite. So the solution to this is, for one, I'm a big believer of freedoms and liberty and our constitutional rights. And I believe in the constitutional right to protest. I am absolutely against these curfews that our cities are now placing on us, saying 5 p.m. curfew is what we have right now, or 4 p.m. curfew, or 6 p.m. curfew. And I say that as somebody who had a group of armed robbers showed up in my apartment complex last night, where we had 3 choppers overhead circulating, looking for these guys. They had robbed a 7-Eleven. They drove their car into my parking garage where my car is. They got out, they ran, they found the car. They didn't find the guys. I was home locking my doors, worried, of course. But nonetheless, even though that hit very close to home for me, because here I am in Los Angeles where things are getting pretty crazy, that hit home for me. But I still do not agree with curfews. I don't agree with, it's my choice if I want to stay home and lock my doors, which last night I did when that happened. I was very okay. I messaged all my neighbors and said, everybody's got to lock your doors, stay inside, get to safety. There's a group of armed guys out there, and they haven't caught them yet. They did eventually catch them, I believe. So, but what we've got to do is respect freedoms, respect our constitutional rights, respect our right to protest, respect our rights to make our choices, but use education and say, look, it's your choice. If you want to risk it, you can risk it, but it's not wise, right? It isn't wise to risk it. So go home, stay safe, do your best, but it's your choice. And at the same time, saying to people, clearly what's going on is angst against the authoritative state that we're living in, a hyper authoritative state. People are fed up and they're desperate. And that desperation of being just desperate to be heard, desperate for change. Screw being heard. Desperate for change. People they want change to actually happen. So they want to be heard to the point where the people actually then say, okay, change is happening. And that is what people are wanting right now. That is why these protests are happening right now. It's just, we can't miss the mark on this. And I believe right now everybody is sort of missing it. And I think this is, they talk about waves of the virus, wave 1, wave 2. I believe this is wave 1 of the protests, that this is just the first iteration of people finally getting their angst and anger out, finally saying enough is enough. And they just needed a reason. They just needed a reason. And that's the way it works for every uprising. All around the world, all throughout history, every uprising that ever happened, it was a defining moment, something, an event, sometimes small, sometimes large, something that happens that causes the entire system to come crumbling down. You look at Syria, for example, they're in the middle of a civil war that has gone on for about a decade, because these things never are short. They're not quick. And in Syria, what was the spark that lit the whole fire in Syria? It was a 13-year-old boy being killed by the police. That event sparked a 10-year civil war. I'm not saying that's where we're headed, but I'm just saying that events spark outrage, and that outrage is it leads to just the outpouring of all of the feelings that the people have been holding in, that have been building up over time. And what we've had in this country, growing inequality. And that inequality has stemmed from a variety of reasons. So some of the inequality can be traced back to racism and slavery. Some of the inequality can be traced back to the rise of hyper-capitalism and the destruction of the middle class and deregulation. But whatever that inequality is, that rise of inequality has created this angst inside of people that we are now seeing manifest in the streets all across America, and probably for days to come. I mean, typically with protests, people protest on the weekend and then they go home. But in this case, they don't have jobs to go to. So I don't see this calming down anytime soon. And I don't know. I think this could be wave one of what might be many to come. So, you know, on that note, you know, I support the protesting. I support people going out there and saying we're fed up, we're through. I support that 100%. The looting and the rioting and the crime, you know, obviously I do not support that. I do think that peaceful protests can lead to change when people do it enough. I do think that there is some strong evidence to show that peaceful protesting does evoke much of the change that could happen that's necessary. But I think that the rioting and the looting and the violence, unfortunately, is somewhat inevitable when you cause people to feel as much strain as they're feeling right now. And when people are desperate, when you take everything from them, what else do they have? They don't have anything else. They have nothing to lose. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Be safe. It is scary right now. If you are going to go out there and protest, leave your children at home. Do not take them, please. I've seen some stories of, you know, young kids getting involved and unfortunately being pepper sprayed. Leave the kids at home. If you want to go out there and protest, you know, obviously know the risks right now. Things are getting a little bit crazy out there, but, you know, use your constitutional right to peacefully assemble and speak up against the establishment. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell. And if you would like to receive my content, if you like to watch the content without commercials and without the man, you know, the big corporate conglomerations involved, you could check out my channel on Rockfin. I've got that link down below. It's about $10 a month and you get my entire show commercial free. Of course, you could still watch it here, but over there you can watch it commercial free and you can ensure that your money is not going to any of the big corporate conglomerations. So I've got that link down for you. Also, if you'd like to support the channel in other ways, the links are down there below, Patreon, PayPal, and whatnot. Thank you so much. This is tough times ahead, and I don't know where this is heading. I don't know where this is leading. I would like to say, yeah, it's all going to be over by next weekend. I'm not so sure. And I'm not going to pretend like I think that's going to be the case. So if anything, I think it will not be. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe.